the end of the second book, 93. With what we have on board, we can manage a link through at one of the remaining polygons, and that's where we're going. This is one of the last few, and our only option without having to dawdle about with sensitive cargo. Let's look ahead to these coordinates. Sturluson fed them in, and his pilot Trosper interfaced them to the ship's advanced viewers. An unexpected sight met them on the display. Sturluson cursed quietly and left the chamber. He returned, leading the princess to the cockpit ahead of him. "Can you identify that ship?" he asked, pointing. A very beefy vessel was floating next to a bizarre space object. After Trosper obliged her better views of a few identifying areas, Princess Soleil replied, "It's an official Vanguard vehicle." "Yes, it is," Rafe Sturluson replied. "Anything more specific?" She shook her head no. His expression turned dark, yet he chuckled a bit through his glower. "Really, this is exactly what they should be doing." "Were you expecting this, Rafe?" "No, Vern. Despite my eminent capabilities, I am not up to the minute on every corner of the universe. But in this case, we've caught up to the cutting edge of the news. In fact, we're making the next headline. I'm used to this. Aren't you?" The last he directed to the princess, still studying the data. Soleil turned to face him directly. "Yes, but not as often in such a manner." She again felt that the benefit of her position within the opposition would amount to little if interrupted at this point. Though she admired the valiance of the Vanguard, she did not wish them the situational victory. "Well, it's like this much of the time in my world. Then again, we give them every reason. They've got every reason right now. Secure everyone in the back," said Sturluson, dismissing Princess Soleil. "Vern, choose your path of approach." Derringer had been hustling along a clear, to him, trail, observing their speed as being inconspicuously reasonable. That was something he could keep up with, even catch up with a little. He stayed on target with light-intensity mini-readings until he noticed a sudden tack that looked responsive. Gauging from experience, his prey was near an objective, and from the angle of the tack from the initial path, he guessed how near and in what direction. He took an opposite tack to complete a pincer movement. Chasing people down was a lot like cooperating with them. Thinking of it that way, he was actually quite the team player. The view resolved, and Derringer moved up to a standoff. A government vehicle nicer than his was flashing a stop and search at a ship nicer than the government vehicle. There was no road here, nothing except for the giant dream catcher twice the size of its government neighbor. This was a strange tableau. Anyone who could add would know that it didn't add up. He was right on time to catch these two buckaroos twitching at each other, whoever they were. Things seemed on the verge of confrontational, and what but he should be right here, as though he were supposed to be. The private investigator, did a secret government employer make him a detective? Ran another math problem. The fact that he's been gambling on trouble, plus observing a fake wreck, plus tracking someone to a random point, plus this fast and expensive sport ship, plus a highly equipped official, plus having powerful silent protection, plus having some of the best gear he's ever been allowed to carry, plus that weird strategy-sized thingy. He absolutely, simply had to get involved, even if he didn't have all the details. If the princess were on the government vehicle, his contract would already be over. So he knew which side to take in case there was a princess in the other one. A half-moment gear up, and he dove in to grab the attention of the... Was that a vanguard? Is he one of ours? Yours? Vern Trosper asked his friend of many years about the new arrival. You know, I'm not sure. I'm not in charge of everything, replied Sturluson, expressing an edge of exasperated humility. Trosper nodded coolly. Then let's brunch first. With rapid stage multi-hold aiming, Trosper's foil beam salvo ended successfully as soon as it started. Invitation sent. Accepted. Vanguard totaled. Peppy observer hobbled. Let's pick them up, said Brave Sturluson, examining their new friend. Hey, that ship's government too, isn't it? It is, isn't it? They weren't acting like buddies. I don't think they are. After a clearly understandable adoption procedure, Derringer stood inside of Trosper's ship, facing Sturluson, who commented, You're an interesting person to have that kind of ship. I'm a really interesting guy. Soleil heard this as she appeared in the hatchway to the compartment where the greeting was happening, compelled to assess this transition herself. Derringer's eyes caught her presence immediately. Who's looking for a really interesting gal? 94. Thanks for the toilets, said the indistinguishable Vidani to the delivery humans. Ariba and Vader, old combat partners. They'd survived a lethal situation to find themselves in automatic employ, but as ex-military, that was not out of the question. They knew how to go along to get along. Are either of you plumbers? Asked their guard. They returned silence after looking at each other. No, then. They were joined by another Vidani, taller than tall and more masculine. Socializing will begin soon, he said in very passable Imperial interlingua. You can join us. It will be beneficial. The invitation seemed voluntary, but there was little other option, and an invitation was better treatment than confinement. Ariba and Vader accepted with a gracious murmur, seemingly abashed not to be speaking the other language in turn. They were led into a small room furnished with small, curvy mountains. They were given a gesture to be at ease. They settled together on a couch-like plateau with a dramatically reclined slope that put them in a strangely casual posture. They accepted it. The room was quiet yet, but the light had ambience. A tray setup was brought in with what were possibly snacks. The two were figuring this situation out little by little. It didn't seem menacing, nor the snacks. Random craned her neck to observe powders in different hues of green. After enough time to want to doze, more humans came in, led by the two familiar Vidani. The room felt temporarily more comfortable. They knew two and recognized one. Oh, wow, Random couldn't help saying when she noted the princess. Toledo caught Random's eye contact and quietly acted as normal as possible. For the first time, Princess Soleil observed a human speaking Vidani language, or approximating it. Rafe Sturluson's pronunciation made the linguistic properties seem more identifiable. It had half-syllables, half-tones, and gestures, quick and chopped, spread across fine frequencies. Throughout a detailed conversation, it was clear where Rafe's speech did not completely match theirs, but remained effective, certainly with greater facility than any human present. A third Vidani joined them in conversation, showing up and rolling forth as though he'd already been part of it. They all appeared particularly congenial upon this occasion, voices riding together with anticipation. Another came in, wheeling a keg-like contraption. She positioned it, unfolding the setup and laying out hand tools of artistic fashion. One conversant left, another went to recline on one of the curvy hills, and the last finished speaking with Rave before exiting. The newly arrived humans stuck together. Aside from the princess, there was a shifty-looking man, one tough lady, and a boy. Rave went over to Random and Toledo. "Perhaps you'd like to join us," he said, using his one left hand to show them the way to the other group. The pair were going to roll with accepting invitations. Interaction was a little awkward, as there were clearly a variety of tensions at play in this party setting. They didn't bother with friendly introductions, just visual acknowledgement. More Vidani people began to arrive in small numbers. Random observed as some approached the snack bar, spooning their choice of ingredients into palm bowls, and then bringing them to the person at the keg contraption. After a short dialogue of choices, she put the bowl into the contraption. It came out transformed into something liquidy and ostensibly appetizing to specifications. The hand tools, which glowed, were selectively applied to the mixture with unique stirring motions. They sipped and mingled. Random checked to see who else among the humans might be curious enough to try this. Rave caught her eye, recognizing the inquisitive spark. He stood and made another gentlemanly invitation, and they traveled over together. "None of the ingredients will hurt you. They have different flavors and are more or less food." Random began to mix an arbitrary palette and decided to broach a topic casually. "So, I've heard that you're evil." "So have I." Ray was making his culinary choices with a little more knowledge. "You let us live. You didn't have to die. I don't kill people just to kill people. That," he paused after this emphasis, "would be crazy." They completed their choices and brought their cute little bowls to the Vidani bartender. When it came to the dialogue of choices, Ariba said, "Tell her she can make mine classic." It returned to her warm and aromatic. Her gaze was drawn to a platter of something familiar looking. "Are those cucumber sandwiches?" Rave looked a little closer. "Approximately, yes." "They eat that too?" Vidani actually can eat most human foods, though for them it's suboptimal. It's become a trend to experiment with human-style cuisine, and they get curious about trying it on actual humans. They've been learning about us for a while already, so they make some achievements. Random picked up a couple in her hand, noting the similar but different texture of the bread. She went back to where she'd been sitting and handed one to Toledo, who inspected, bit, and nodded. Wendell Harper, possibly the most upset to be captive, gave Sturluson a dead stare as he sipped his green drink with them. "What's going on here?" she asked succinctly. "Plainly," he replied. "We're going to receive a C-voice transmission. It's a special occasion, and we are fortunate enough in our timing to be included. I myself have never before been in attendance, and I've known them longer than most. I was a child when my father first introduced me to a Vidani person, a little more than 30 years ago." He let that sink in. "Then that was not long before Hyrillian suffered the affliction," stated Soleil, her voice sounding louder than she intended. "Princess, you are correct." With a long sip, he drained his bowl and went to join a group of Vidani in conversation. Randa Mariba also finished her bowl. If anybody's hungry, this doesn't hurt. I'm going for seconds, and I'll show you how to do it if you want to go with me. She stood half expectantly. Plus, sandwiches. I'll try it, said Soleil, getting up. Sandwiches, said Toller. Wendell remained unmoved, and Trosper remained unruffled. Soleil had just handed her bowl of ingredients to the woman at the mixer when she heard a young, accented voice behind her say, "Potato? Potato?" Wonderingly, she lifted a fist, replying as she turned, "Potato?" Calmly, they walked their fists across the room to each other, the Scion princess of the Pangalactic Imperium and a Vidani lass. Standing face to face, they bumped their knuckles and then spread their fingers apart, wiggling them as they withdrew their hands in the air. "Fries," they said in unison. "Crinkle cut," said the girl. The rest of the pack of youngsters waved their arms at her from the doorway. "What are you doing here?" "We were invited. Our scape work had been garnering enough attention that we've recently been able to speak with the voice of authority, which can come from anybody, but only if they've earned it." She appeared as though she'd never had to explain this to anyone. It happens when someone has achieved the genuine authority of knowledge, and factors and chords in the etherscapes support the voice of the person or people who have the authority. We can hear it. People become interested in what is said and done with voices of authority. The youths stood proudly. Some of what we did with you is part of it. Listening to the live performance of a sea voice is an honor for people advancing to the edges of innovation. But what are you doing here? You disappeared. I'm back because your associates, Sturluson and Trosper, happened to find me and my friends and take us with them after they disabled our ship. The Vidani girl looked over at the clump of humans who were all watching them and listening. Returning their attention, Trosper lifted his arm and pointed at Wendell. "I was looking for her." Wendell let her face sink into her hand. "And I had just decided to help the stranded princess along to her next destination." She sounded tired and resigned. "Okay," said the speaker of the young group, "I can see that this is a long story. Welcome back." Her friends had approached and were now clustered near the both of them. "Now that we're meeting in person, how about a formal exchange of names? I'm Kate." "Kate?" There were little sounds on either side of this, but that was the main phoneme landing in Soleil's ears. "Sure." "And I'm Soleil." Rafe Sturluson raised his eyebrows at the socially appropriate lack of honorific. He wondered if she had consciously noted that Vidani do not use them, or if it was an accidentally fitting diplomatic tact, or if she was setting her title aside out of personal taste. "Soleil?" "Yes, just so." As she looked around, the room was filling up. 2 other humans in Hyrilionite garb entered with more Vidani, till the remaining reclining spaces had filled. It seemed like time, and it was. People quieted when Exter began to address the room from a central point. "I will speak first of what we are doing to the humans present. What is a sea voice? We have known of them for a very long time, yet their true essence is enigmatic. They contact us, and we contact them in return. Only at such times one will communicate with us at length. This is in a medium we cannot entirely understand, both like words and like music, dissimilar from our own and still never quite translated, in a manner of perspective. What we have learned through this occasional relationship is that after we have listened to a sea voice, which occurs only fleetingly, we achieve advances, innovation, and excellence that we had not before. We also simply find the sound of the sea voice to be beautiful, though it is not hard to appreciate something so beneficial. There will also be a light show by us. The sea voice often responds to this, and we believe it is somehow also transmitted via the open channel we create together. We call it a sea voice because our research tells us the audio waveform carries disturbances typical of transmission through large amounts of water. Theoretical testing continues to confirm this supposition. Please, tell us what you thought of the transmission during the discussion to follow. The host of the space, Oven, then gave a Vedani speech that sounded more like formal ritual. Some of them raised their bowls at one point, and the lights dimmed to near darkness. A humming sound began, one by one, from the people in the room who knew what they were doing. Those Vedani who didn't yet listened carefully. After a time, Rafe Sturluson closed his eyes to listen. The collective hum rose and fell in susurrus until the oscillation rested around a consistent central zone. Quietly, a wailing overtone introduced itself to the sounds. This didn't appear to come from anyone in the room. It existed somewhere between recognizable emotions and tones of conversation, thereof encompassing many. It possessed a pulsing rhythm, cadences holding suspense and release. Light began to respond with diffraction patterns on the curved ceiling, seeking similar visual tones. This had its own language of artistry, such as could be transmitted by people who innately visualize information. The aggregate appearance expanded the dimensions of the ceiling to those of an intimate, small sky. There were counterpoints of transformation between vision and sound. People relaxed into their parts in this ceremony of communication, and the contoured mountain slope furniture made more sense for this event. Eventually, after a long expression, the sea voice receded. People dropped out of the supporting hum, one by one. As the light show released the last few artful flickers, 4 figures formed from them, flickering in the air. They were surprising, yet familiar, and they were cheering. Oven arose to welcome the Kyoshi, giving them a customary compliment on their timing. They chorused appreciation, particularly on the light work from which they appeared. The audience began to rise and make social discussion, as mentioned. The luminous forms of the Kyoshi, as though projected from the light show, were of a human Vedani sociable appearance and size. One of these departed from his companions and glided over to Scion Princess Soleil. Dragon Food made one of his bravo presentations. She nodded and smiled in recognition. He said, "You may be pleased to know that Moonshadow was rescued from the Brave Crossing. I don't know how you managed it, but I am very glad to hear that, yes." Soleil's path had taken her into some strange corridors, and she wondered where else she may soon be. There was Derringer over there, watching this encounter from an angle, and Soleil realized she'd lost track of him since, before the sea voice had begun. It was a large room, but there weren't that many humans present. They hadn't discussed any details of his pursuit, But the princess guessed he had power behind him, and guessed further where it could come from. He wasn't as ragged and random as he was able to appear. Dragon Food acknowledged the company of Exter, now joining them. Exter made a special motion of greeting to the Kyoshi, splaying the fingers of one hand and passing them upwards over one eye. Dragon Food's form pulsed once with brightness. Exter addressed Soleil in his well-spoken interlingua. I want to introduce someone, and we'd like to speak with you on a serious matter. Without Exter changing focus, a second Vidani joined them at his side. Dragon Food remained and looked on with interest. This is Ailerin. Ailerin. She was as elongated and slender as Exter, a slightly different shade of blue-green. Ailerin gazed directly into Soleil's face in the manner that Vidani consider formally polite. While you were on your excursion, after your training, you met someone who told you about something that happened. He has since spoken with us. Akamar. A momentary hush seemed to follow Soleil's utterance of the name. Yes. Looking at the two, she felt on the brink of something she didn't want to hear. This dragon knows the Vidani people through our workings, with her egg from before he hatched. Akamar's moment of hatching had been the death of Soleil's mother, Queen Ascendant Charlotte. Soleil pieced things together as Ailerin continued. It's hard to explain to someone who was not a part of it, but you have met Akamar, and we are giving you this knowledge now while you still face us. This was happening in the midst of many discussions not a part of it, but Soleil knew that these folk all around her were habitually a part of multiple discussions. The formation of Akamar's egg and the nature of it became known to us amidst a chain of critical juncture decisions regarding our own growing bad relationship with the Pan-Galactic Imperium. There was a new, yet already true, energy function of space field. The stillness which transmits and transforms, a transition so complex yet essential that it is everywhere as itself in a variety as deep as only a living being can possess. That's one way to describe a dragon, this dragon. And while this description was as yet unembodied, we were one of the forces called to this egg, a part of the universe that told it what it was becoming. We used the egg, said Exter, in agreement with its nature and its first aid. Soleil understood this phrase to mean that the dragons that nurtured a new dragon into existence via something called an egg. Electromagnetic generative gyre. Elamagnetic generative gyre had been an Arcuda half-joke. In this way, our means accomplished enough that we have moved our plans forward, as have they, said Ailerin, referring to those first 8. The signalman has aligned us well. Soleil also observed Dragon Food, solidly listening, as though none of this was a surprise. Is the next reader in here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Then I think it's time.
Yeah. I was letting you finish up.
Okay, I was waiting for somebody to come up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.